Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Sat Sangat Ji. Today we're at the Wolverhampton Art Gallery, and you know what? We're about to show you some amazing work by the Singh Twins. And you know, the world internationally renowned contemporary artists that are award-winning, and so much work that they've done over the past 30 years, and some of the work is absolutely phenomenal and we're familiar with. But today a new exhibition has opened here, and we'll be highlighting the new works that they've just done now, from the 21st of July to the 16th of September. So do make an effort to go down and check out these new works and supporting our artists. And what we're going to do is we're going to show you a glimpse of what's inside, talk about some of the pieces and find out about the Singh Twins, what inspired them to do this, because there's a lot of references to Punjabi and Sikh history within the artwork they do. And what we'll do is we'll show you that so you can see for yourself. Aajo ji. Sat Sangat Ji, now, you know, I'm so honoured to have with me at the moment the Twin Singhs. This is absolutely amazing. I've had a glimpse of the work already, and I can tell you for free, it is absolutely amazing, Sat Sangat Ji. You have to take the time to come out to this particular exhibition here at the Wolverhampton Art Gallery and see for yourself the amazing work that's been produced here, and you know, by our very own community members, and they're internationally renowned. It's absolutely amazing. So what I want to keep carrying on, but let's talk to the Twin Singhs and find out what this whole exhibition is about. First of all, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Benji, you know, as you could probably see, I'm really enthusiastic because the viewers haven't had a chance to see the actual work yet. I have, so that's why I'm like, wow, it's absolutely amazing. I've been here, we're supposed to be doing a film for 25 minutes, but I've been looking at the art for about an hour and a half now. It's so much to see in detail. First of all, Benji, you know, what inspired you to do this?
Well, it's inspired by a trip. It's taken 4 years to make this show, so this trip took place 4 years ago to a little town in France called Nantes. And in this town they had a museum dedicated to the history of slavery, and in one of their galleries there were these beautiful textiles hanging up, which the curator explained to us were actually textiles made by order of the French, but actually in India, and these textiles were used to exchange for enslaved Africans. And it all made sense because these textiles didn't look very Indian to us. They had sort of rhinos and tigers, well, not tigers, I should say, lions, and little African huts and little African palm trees on them. And it was quite an eye-opener to us because this transatlantic slave triangle people think of as something historically belonging to the West. It was this transfer of luxury commodities and unfortunately enslaved people between Europe, the Americas and Africa. And we had no idea that India was actually part of this slave trade. And what we discovered, we went back home and we wanted to research a little bit more about this history, and we discovered that India was actually a country that everybody wanted a piece of, a bit like now with the whole post-Brexit chat and everybody wanting to get their foothold with trade in India. We're talking about 500 years ago, that far back, that they had the Dutch, the French, the Portuguese, the English, all vying for a little piece of India and what India had to offer. And of course, part of that offer were these fantastic textiles, very varied textiles, from muslins to chintzes to calicos, just plain Kashmiri shawls, of course, yes. So we started researching this history, and we actually discovered that the history of Indian textiles wasn't really about textiles at all when you got into the nitty-gritty of it. It was about the whole history of empire, colonialism, slavery and conquest, of course, and how that linked into our luxury lifestyle. Because 500 years ago, there were consumers, avidly buying things just as we are consumers buying things today. So the exhibition here that we're standing in is called Slaves of Fashion, and it's about that link between the politics of trade and the enslavement of people, but also it's about how we as consumers are also slaves to commodities, that we buy into luxury goods even today without thinking of the consequences of how they've been produced and who suffered for that production.
That is so deep, so powerful, and obviously your art will obviously transcend that message and tells a story. Every single one of your art works here are going to tell that story. And how much research must it take to do this?
Well, the first year alone of the whole 4-year project was just researching. And to be honest, at first we thought it might be quite boring because we picked up this book on cotton and thought, okay, fasten our seatbelts, here we go. And it was the most fascinating thing you could ever think think of the story, linking into, the Industrial Revolution and, slavery, the American Civil War. And so we soon got really engrossed in the research, and 1 year down the line we thought, hang on a minute, we've got to produce some work, we better stop the research, we're running out of time. And the other thing we did as part of the research, which involved not just reading articles on the internet or watching documentaries, but we also looked at historical objects closer to home. So we're from the Liverpool area, so we looked at the archives of the National Museums Liverpool, which is several venues, and we were looking at textiles and ceramics and memorabilia, and we were trying to think, how do these objects locally fit into this story that we were trying to tell? So there were things like, a pair of blue jeans, how does that fit into the history of Indian textiles, one might ask. But if you look at the colour of jeans, which is indigo blue, indigo coming from the Roman word indicum, meaning from India, this is a dye that goes back to India for, it's an ancient dye which the Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians all bought into, and much later on it came to Europe and particularly Britain under the East India Company, who actually gained a monopoly on the indigo trade. It was so expensive it was known as blue gold, and it was actually used as currency at one point to exchange for enslaved Africans. And actually Lahore, obviously the capital of Sikh kingdoms, was a major trading port for this indigo, for the very best quality of indigo that everybody demanded in the West as well. And as with that story of indigo, with a lot of the works in the exhibition, although it's about essentially the connection between Britain and India, it is that global story, but it's also a story that we have tried to weave in our own heritage, our own Punjabi Sikh identity and history too. And we were amazed to find how many links there were with our own heritage to that wider story that we're telling.
I'm not lying, it's absolutely phenomenal, the research that you've done, the amount of research you've done, a whole year just to, on cotton, as you said, Benji, on textile. And I love the fact that you've brought this all together. Reflection of what happened 500 years ago is exactly what's happening today. So you've brought the whole message, and at the same time you've managed to make the links with the Sikh history, the Punjabi, the Indian, the whole. I'm in awe. I'm absolutely in awe, and I'm actually lost for words, Stephen. What do I even say? Because I think what it is, we need to show the Sangat, right, and the viewers some of the works so they can see exactly how much detail and how much history you can learn from just one piece of art. It's absolutely amazing. So what we'll do, we'll go and show some of the works now, and we'll talk a bit more about them in depth, and then we'll come back to you guys and find a bit more about yourselves, your inspiration, and the amount of work that you've actually put in and to the field of art, and you've been recognised as a result of. And we'll do that a bit later on, but let's go and see some of the works so that the viewers at home can see this is absolutely phenomenal.
Well, this is one of the 11 lightbox artworks that are in the exhibition, which takes a historical perspective. And each of those have concentrate on a particular textile of India or a place where it was produced. So in this case, we're looking at Kashmiri shawls, and the title is From Punjab to Paisley. And there are many stories within this work, but to highlight the Punjab references, we have a little depiction or portrait of Maharaja Ranjit Singh just to the left of the main figure. This is a Russian aristocrat, and these shawls, Kashmiri shawls, were very popular in Russia. They were exported to Russia as well as the rest of Europe. And one of the main patrons of the shawls was our very own Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who is depicted here in front of the Golden Temple. And under his rule, shawls were exported through St. Petersburg in Russia particularly, and there were certain factories that were set up in Russia too that started trying to copy the shawls from India. And so this woman here is actually holding out one of the Russian-produced shawls from a factory called Melina. And you can just see the design has this typical Punjabi, what we call the Ambi design on there, the Paisley design. And but if you look closely into the Paisley pattern itself, that teardrop shape, it's actually got Russian flowers in there, not Indian flowers. So the Russians kind of took on board the general concept of the Kashmiri shawls, which are characterized by this Ambi design, but introduced their own motifs to make it more relevant for the Russian market. On the lady's dress, we also have this stylized pattern, which includes the mango plant itself. And why we wanted to do that was because most people in the West know this motif as a paisley. You get, your paisley pattern, ties and all of that. And the reason it's called Paisley in the West is because these shawls, a town in Scotland called Paisley. So everybody thinks they've come from Scotland, but no, you have to go back further and see that these shawls came from Punjab and only became known as Paisley shawls once they were produced in the town of Paisley itself. And they were produced in Paisley in competition with the Indian shawls. So Britain was very keen to take over the Indian production, and that was a huge lucrative markets that they had. And that's why centres across Europe popped up that were competing with these handmade shawls.
Yeah.
Now, during the time of Ranjit Singh, he had two generals in his army who were European generals, Ventura and Allard. And they themselves acted as agents to transport these shawls, particularly to France. So you have General Allard and Ventura's coat of arms incorporated into the design of this artwork in this border here. So if you can zoom in really closely and you can see the coat of arms of General Allard and the coat of arms of Ventura. And in the centre you have this motif that belongs to Napoleon Bonaparte, because he was also a patron of these shawls. He actually, during his campaigns in Africa, a lot of his soldiers would actually take the Paisley shawls from the defeated armies that they were engaged with, the Arab armies, and bring them back to France. And that's how these shawls were introduced into France. But Napoleon, who was obviously the ruler of France at the time, he went mad on these shawls, and he imported a lot for his Empress Josephine, who at first wasn't too keen on them, but then she became really enamoured by them. And she actually set the trend for these shawls becoming popular in Paris, and from then on it spread to the rest of Europe.
There's so much history in this one piece of art. Is unbelievable, and how you guys can remember this that's amazing also. But even the picture, I was looking at this and thinking, what's this going to have to do with Punjab or Indian culture whatsoever? And then you look at that picture and all of a sudden you struck, hold up, you got Shire Punjab Maharaj Ranjit Singh in front of Sidi Harmandir Sahib, right in the centre. That's absolutely fantastic. And then the whole history of where the whole design of the, like Benji mentioned, the Ambi and the whole design coming from Punjab itself, and how much it played a role across this history is fantastic, unbelievable, isn't it?
It's an amazing story, yes. And I think what we've tried to show with this exhibition is that history doesn't belong to one people, one nation, one time even. We're all connected by these different strands, and trade in particular was a way in which many of these cross-cultural connections came about, the exchange of goods, exchange of ideas. It is a fascinating history, and I think it's hopefully a show that a lot of communities will connect with in different ways, not just our own Punjabi Sikh communities, but the Afro-Caribbean, American, European, whichever continent you take, there's a story in these works that relate to them.
Absolutely fantastic. Let's go to the next piece.
This artwork, as you pointed out, is called Fulkari. So it's obviously about the handcrafted embroidery tradition of the Punjab in particular. It's quite a different textile to the others in the exhibition, because they're all to do with textiles that had a kind of commercial value. That's what, a lot of them were produced commercially, whereas this craft was pretty much limited originally to the village craftsmanship, and it was of course produced by the women of the villages as part of their dowry. They would have these beautiful shawls that they would take with them when they were married, and they had a lot of symbolic meaning as well. A lot of the colours and the imagery used in the shawls had a meaning that linked into particularly the agricultural communities of Punjab. So the main figure of this is Amrita Shergill, who is half Sikh, half Hungarian, very famous contemporary artist. She's actually known as the mother of contemporary Indian art. That's how impactful her practice was. And why we've chosen her for this particular piece is because a lot of her later artworks, she actually became very interested in her own Punjabi heritage, and she used to do a lot of paintings that depicted scenes of Punjabi or rural Indian life, where you could often see the figures in her artworks wearing fulkaris, or fulkaris draped across manjis and that kind of thing. So she has a link to the story of the fulkari tradition. There's also images in here that show how this craft, the progress or the sort of decline, I guess, the opposite to the progress of this craft due to the partition of India, which is represented by a scene through the window with the sort of the blood-stained river, and you have Pakistan on one side and India on the other, represented by the Satluj River. So it's showing how conflict and trauma actually caused a decline in the production of shawls, because obviously the upheaval of families having to move between the borders of Pakistan and India, and just the emotional trauma of the politics and the horrors that happened at that time, there was a notable decline in the production of these shawls until they then became revived later on in the 20th century. And through that revival, we also had a decline in a sort, because we started to move away from the hand-produced shawls towards some mechanically produced imitations of the real thing, and the use of synthetic dyes, which is represented by this little figure in the bottom left-hand corner of the artwork. You have a Punjabi bride working away at her cotton spinning. The production of these shawls, you started right from the cotton fields of the Punjabi, farmers, and the ladies would spin the cotton into the yarn and then make these beautiful shawls, which were cotton-based, but also had silk thread embroidered patterns. So on the carpet that she's sitting on, you have various flowers that represent the types of products that went into making the shawl. You've got the silk moth there, and you have a flower called madder, which is the yellow flower in the centre of the carpets. And the madder was a flower from which they managed to produce the beautiful, typical red dye that the backcloth of these Fulkari shawls are made from. And of course, the cotton base of that, which she's spinning, was the khadi, the proper hand-spun khadi base that the shawls were made of as well. You have other details in the artwork which look at how at certain times in history, particularly the Victorian period, when there was a limited market for these shawls abroad, outside of India, due to the connections of the British military in India, for example, and the European missionary activities in India, which are represented by other details in the artwork. On the left, you have a church, which is one of the churches that was built in the complexes of Harmandir Sahib Ji. And I think it was at that time the sort of British putting their stamp, their authority on our holy spaces as a kind of mark of their rule and dominance of Punjab and indeed the whole of India at that time. And on the right, we have an image relating to the military connection. So these shawls were things that were brought back by Europeans serving in India in various ways as souvenirs of their time in India. And over a period of time, they became quite popular amongst Europeans. And again, that caused a deterioration in the craftsmanship, because it led to the demand for a much cheaper, affordable version of these shawls. You can imagine as a handcrafted object and the time it would take to make these, they were very, very expensive to buy for the real thing. So again, we had these mass productions. And as a backlash to that mechanisation, there were actually key figures in European history. So people like Kipling and even Queen Victoria, both of whom are represented in the artwork, who initiated various ways of trying to revive that handcrafted tradition, not just of the Fulkari and other Indian textiles, but different Indian handicrafts in general. And they're represented in the artwork here through, for example, Queen Victoria. She's holding in her hand a scroll which has the words Osborne House written on it. And that relates to her royal residence on the Isle of Wight, where she has a room that was specifically commissioned in the Indian Darbar style, so the kind of royal courtly style. And who did she get to help her with that? It was the Punjabi Sikh artist Kam Singh, who's also represented in this same artwork to the left of her.
I was just about to ask you, who that looks like a Singh to me, and a proper Chardi Kala, but who is this person? Well,
it's Kam Singh. He was an architect and designer whom, as I just mentioned, Queen Victoria commissioned to design her palace, one of the rooms in her palace in Indian style. But he was also one of the directors of the Maya School of Art, which I think now is called the Lahore School of Art. And that was an establishment set up by his former tutor, Kipling. And it was specifically set up to train, can you believe this, Europeans retraining Indians how to produce these, their various crafts, really, in the manner that they were intended to be produced originally, in the sort of fine hand-worked craftsmanship that that they were known for originally.
That is so much history, and you know what, it takes you back when you're sitting there, as we're looking at the imagery and you're talking about it, you can go back to these times. As you're doing a great job here, absolutely fantastic. Any other thing that you'd like to point out? I'm just looking at it. I just love the detail, the different contemporary art, the different scenes that you've all embroidered into this one sequence of events that's happening. Like you said earlier, it's a timeline that's not destined to one particular time. It's throughout the ages, and not only that, through different cultures meeting, and what they're doing at the art is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But what we'll do is we'll move on to the next one. Unless,
okay.
Did you want to add anything?
No, that's fine. I think we could spend a whole week talking about lots more. Yeah, there's a lot more to say.
There's a lot. Yeah, let's move on to the next one, and then we'll take from there.
Well, this work is called Cotton Threads of Change, and it's really looking at the legacies of empire. So empire is something, and colonialism is so intricately linked to the story of trade and trade in textiles. And two of the legacies, of course, of empire and the connection between Britain and India, and the fact that Britain became the conquerors of India, is this idea of displacement and dispossession. So we saw it with our Kingdom of Punjab, how that was annexed to the British Empire, and how we as a community lost much of our heritage because of that. And here we see it in a very personal way through the figure of Princess Sophia Dalip Singh, daughter of Maharaja Dalip Singh, who, as many of you will know, was born in Britain, brought up in Britain, as a direct consequence of the fact that Punjab, the kingdom of her forefathers, was annexed to the British Empire. Her father was displaced as emperor, exiled from Punjab originally by the British, and then brought to England and as a sort of teenager, and brought up as a young English gentleman and educated in the ways of the young English gentleman. Also, he was, many of you will know that he was converted to Christianity as well. So that imagery, that story is all represented in the imagery dedicated to him in this particular work, just above Sophia's head. So one of the reasons why we chose Princess Sophia to represent cotton was because she has a family connection to cotton, in that her mother's father, so her maternal grandfather, was Mullah Bamba, who was actually a cotton merchant and actually had investments and trade in Liverpool itself. And she was also, of course, very active in terms of the social welfare that she did, and she was a leading suffragette. Not many people realise. Everybody hears about Emily Pankhurst, and we've had the anniversary of the suffragettes this year. But how many people have actually referenced Princess Sophia Bamba in that whole story? And she was right up there with the likes of Emily Pankhurst. And, was very influential, being a princess and actually being involved in such a campaign at that time. And we've got her wearing all her refinery, her jewellery, because one of the stories we wanted to link into that whole aspect of her involvement in the suffragette movement was that she refused to pay her taxes as a way of protesting, because women at that time felt, well, if they are not going to get the vote, why should they pay taxes? And as punishment for that, because she was a princess, would have been very awkward and difficult for the government to put her in jail. So what they did instead was to confiscate her jewellery. And that's why we've shown her wearing, the jewels that she's wearing are actually based on historical pieces that would, belong to the family. She was also very active, as I say, in social work. So like her father before her, she set up homes for the Lascars, which were the Indian sailors that used to work for companies like the East India Company, but very often were abandoned at the ports. So when they found themselves abandoned in places like Britain, they had no means of getting home, and they would often be left destitute on the streets and in opium dens and all sorts of other horrible situations. Princess Bamba and her father saw the plight of these sailors, and they set up homes for them. And alongside that, she was also very proactive in really speaking out for workers' rights in the mills as well of Lancashire. So you have this little girl in the bottom right-hand corner who represents one of the mill workers who were obviously in dire straits and poverty and had to work in really terrible conditions at the time.
This is so much history. You know what? I don't want you to stop. I'm going to keep going and on, going on, because look, I'm learning so much from this. This is our history. And if we don't take time out to come and take part in this, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot. And you know what? Thank you to you guys. And I'll probably say it again in the show, but I need to say it now because that was amazing. so much reference to Maharaja Dalip Singh, their daughter, how it all happened, what was going on, what they still continue to do and help those that were less fortunate and needed help. That Sikhi compassion still shone through, and they still fought for women's rights. What Guru Nanak Dev Ji did 550 years ago. You know what? It's absolutely amazing. I want you to just another minute on this, please, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Well, another detail to point out, I guess, is how the story of cotton and Punjab, which is part of Sophia's heritage and all of our heritage, links into politics. So we have a figure just behind her in the background which represents the partition of India, but also the freedom struggles of India, much of which we as a Sikh community don't get the recognition we deserve. So we made sure within the context of that, of course, Mahatma Gandhi is a key figure there, and he's represented because he's someone that symbolises a movement that a recognisable figure for most people, but we also wanted to incorporate our contribution. So to the right of Sophia, in that background, we also have the monument, Jallianwala Bagh monument, which was an episode in British Indian history, which was seen as the actual catalyst for the freedom movements in India.
Real turning point.
Yes, it was a really major turning point in the whole freedom movement of India. So that's represented there, and it's also represented in the archway above Mahatma Gandhi in the words Jallianwala Bagh on the right, but also on the left, written within that same archway, are the words Khadi movement, because again, the Khadi movement, which people associate with Mahatma Gandhi's call for a return to homespun cottons, actually was a movement initiated decades before Mahatma Gandhi by the Kukka movement, who were a community that were known for wearing pure white hand-spun cotton, and that was really a direct sort of backlash to the atrocities of British rule at a time where British textiles were being made in Britain and exported back to India, and forcing the Indian production of textiles into the ground and causing all sorts of awful situations for the craftspeople, but also Indians in general who couldn't afford the British textiles, or who didn't have a livelihood because their own manufacturing was totally ruined by the British presence in India. And of course the Kukka movement was led by Sikhs, so that's a lot of people forget that they pioneered a lot of these kind of movements that were then later used in the independence movement.
One other thing I want to touch upon, there's so much history in this, and there's, like you said earlier, in the other artwork, you could be here for a whole week going through this, and you're right, and because this is why people need to definitely come down to the Wolverhampton Art Gallery anywhere between 21st of July to the 16th of September. You've got to make the effort, bring your family. There's so much to see and learn, but at the same time there's a lot of words that you've got in here, like dungarees, khaki. What does that all come into?
Well, all these words relate to the cross-cultural connections that have been made through trade and politics and conquest. So, of course, all these words we think are English. You'll find them in the English dictionary. Actually originate again from India, and particularly through the trade in textiles, because they are references to types of garments or cloth. So calico, khadi, khaki, chintz, pajamas, bandana, even the American bandanas that we all think are from America originated from Madras in India, and they were one of the most highly sought after and popular types of cloth that were exported from 400 years ago, and continue to be a very popular fashion item, but we've lost the origins of where it came from. We think it's all to do with American hip-hop culture,
cowboys.
But far from it, and cowboys, yeah.
One thing I want to touch upon is this elderly gentleman who seems to be begging, I think,
yeah.
But he's outside Parliament. Looks like Big Ben and all sorts. What's this? What does this represent? Is this the sailors?
That's right. This figure underneath him is written the Laskar's plight, the abandoned sailors that were left penniless very often on the streets and had no means of getting back to India. One of the ways that they actually tried to earn a living was to sell religious pamphlets. So he's actually holding in his hand verses from the Bible, which is historically, when we were researching these images, you look at some of the really old Victorian newspaper accounts, for example, of what these people had to endure. And this was one of the ways that, although they weren't Christians themselves, they earned a living by actually selling Christian pamphlets in their hands. So he's shown holding that. But above his head, of course, is a ship, which represents how the Lascars were not just sailors who were involved in the trade of cotton and other goods, but they also were they served in the military armies of Britain as well, way back since the annexation of Punjab. right the way through to World War I, World War II.
So something that you've seen, look at this, is absolutely amazing how the textile industry historically and what the significances are both culturally here in Britain and in the Punjab, and how they intertwine is absolutely amazing, and is brought out in these pieces of artwork here at the Wolverhampton Art Gallery. There's one piece I want to show you. I can't show you all the pieces, you have to come down and see all the pieces, but one piece in particular I wanted to show you that brought it down to modern day. And you've got President Trump of America sitting on his throne basically, but quickly, Benji, just tell us what's happening here.
Well, it's an image about cotton, so it's looking at the modern context of how cotton cultivation is linked to types of modern-day slavery, but also the worker rights debates that are going on today. And it's linking in the cultivation, particularly of GM crops, which is genetically modified cotton, with the plight of farmers in India, particularly the Punjabi farmers, many of whom are committing suicide. And this suicide rate has been linked to GM cotton cultivation, because it's believed that the farmers get into this cycle of debt, buying into these very expensive high-tech seeds, which they have to only use once. They can't keep any back for the next harvest. So they have to then buy into new products and fertilizers that go with these products. And they get into debt because they can't afford them. There comes a time where they just can't afford to buy these, and the crops fail, and it's causing all sorts of social problems in Punjab as elsewhere in India.
That is so powerful and so up to date. Is fantastic. Benji, you know what? It's been such a tremendous day today. And you know what? The Sangata, the viewers, if you get a chance, you definitely need to come down to the Wolverhampton Art Gallery and you guys see this amazing work. And you know what? These amazing people have done such amazing work. I can't think of any other word, because when you see it for yourself, how much history and you learn it with one piece of art is absolutely phenomenal. So, for myself and the C Channel, we're absolutely honoured to have met yourselves and had a glimpse of the gallery today. And I'm sure the viewers had a glimpse. And I'm thanking you for bringing history back to life. Tada बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद जी. वाहिगुरू जी का खालसा, वाहिगुरू जी की फतेह.
So tell us, what did you think of the exhibition this evening?
It's absolutely fantastic and very thought-provoking. Each piece just tells a million stories, and each time I looked at the piece with a different pair of eyes, it told me something different, or I picked something different. And it's just wonderful that an exhibition like this has come to Wolverhampton. It's got so much to offer the community, and I would encourage everybody to attend.
Absolutely agree with Tarvinder there. I think you can come time and time again and discover something new each time. And I think it's for the family, for the younger generations to the older generations, from all walks of life. There's something there for everyone. So I'll definitely be coming again.
Yeah, with our colleagues and families, yeah.
I thought the exhibition looked fantastic in the space here at Wolverhampton. I think the images on the light boxes look really beautiful against the dark walls, and they've all got really interesting and fascinating stories behind them, hidden histories, and it was fascinating looking through the artworks.
I think it's absolutely stunning. I had no idea that the work was going to be so intricate. And I'm also amazed that they have learned the technique of miniature painting by themselves. They're self-taught. And I know some of the traditional art, which it kind of takes off from. But in terms of the way they have built in such complex narratives into their paintings, I think is so impressive. I'm certainly going to visit it very often. As it happens, I teach in the university right next door, so I'm so glad I came today, and I will be telling many people, a number of my students, that they must come and see it. I also like the fact that it is so overtly political and not shy of making political comments, which I think is very brave of them. There's so few people now who really care to make political comment and express so openly their values. So I really love it. I'm really impressed. It's beautiful.
It's a really beautiful exhibition, and it's really nice to see the Singh Twins work on much larger scale, but still retain that sense of the handcrafted, hand painting, the labour that goes into it. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
I really like the way that they use traditional methods of artwork. with digital works as well. I find it really interesting, and
the history and the layered narratives within it as well. I think you could come back to these works again and again and spot something different, which is telling about history, but also the position that we're in now. It's really important.
I thought the exhibition was really insightful, really challenging in terms of challenging perceptions on what we think the history of the story of fashion is, and also kind of the Indian diaspora. When I look at the exhibition, I can see myself being represented, and that's important, and it's brilliant in terms of opening the pathways for members of other communities who don't normally access the art gallery or to access any exhibitions or artwork, to be able to connect with it on a level that's part of, say, their heritage. I think the other important thing is as well is that the stories are universal in terms of how other diasporas have developed and progressed and created their own heritage in terms of that in the UK, and how they can relate that to their motherlands. I just love the work of the Singh Twins, and I'm just really excited that they're here in Wolverhampton.
I just thought it was very good, and the intricacy of so much of the work was astounding.
I really enjoyed it. It was very insightful. Just learnt a lot, not just their technique, but just the whole narrative that they built around their own collection and their artwork. It was amazing.
Fabulous exhibition. It's filled with historical elements and much food for thought, and it's very decorative and beautiful and touches on many things. There's lots of things to research, and it's a real eye-opener. Yeah, it's very beautiful.
I think it's interesting that it brings the past into the 21st century
and allows people to reflect.
I thought the exhibition was absolutely inspirational. It was really lovely to be able to view, history from a different lens, and to be able to learn about the empire and the role that it played in the slave trade and the exploitation of India and its resources. So for me, somebody who's done British history, this was something totally new, and I feel totally inspired, and I just feel, as someone who's been involved in race equality, the exhibition has thrown up a number of different perspectives and themes for me to be able to explore in the work that I do. So, and of course it's been a pleasure to meet the Singh Twins, because they're so personable, and their message is so empowering. And as an Indian woman, to see other Indian women, to see Indian women taking this exhibition around the country and challenging the system, using their art, I think it's fantastic, really inspiring.
It's absolutely amazing. It's really intricate, and the backlighting works fantastically with it. So much detail. I would say it must have taken hours and hours of research to find the smallest of details that you might not even notice if you don't spend enough time looking at it. So it's great to be able to get in and have a really good close look.
I mean, I had quite high expectations because I love the work, but actually it's so good. I really love it. I spent nearly ages in front of each image because there's so much detail and there's so many sub-stories and stuff like that. It's lovely, and I love the fact that it's so polite but so subversive at the same time.
There's 7 things that I've written down that I'd like to share with you guys as why you should come and visit this show. The first one is King Cotton, an artist's tale. The reason why I love that is it's visual, it's got lots of old sketches, etchings with visual narrative and stuff. So today's modern market will really kind of appreciate that engagement, like with video and stuff like that. And the story is really cool, it's quite amazing. I like the time lapse of actually seeing the artist create a piece of work as well. That's really lovely, like the close-up detail of it. And the 2 meter high light boxes are absolutely phenomenal. I've never seen work presented like that before, like textiles that's on a light box. It's incredible. And in a dark room like that, it's they really come alive. It's really amazing. The exhibition's deep, man. There is so much to learn here about culture and heritage and just history, world history. There's very few exhibitions that actually excite me to come back and actually study further, but this one does. So I'll definitely be back again and again to be trying to soak in as much as I can from this exhibition. The team have done a great job in curating this and what they put together in the show. There's such a richness of works and things to appreciate. Honestly, I'm truly amazed. It's really, really amazing. The hospitality, fantastic, and the introduction to the artists was really, really fantastic. So, yeah, really fantastic show. I'm here by chance, and yeah, what a great event.
Well, for a start, I came to the exhibition because I'd seen the Singh sisters' work in Mac in Birmingham, and they tell me, having talked to them this evening, that was in 1999. And at the time, I made sure I left them my name and address because I found them so intriguing. They had produced these tiny watercolors in the Mughal miniaturist style. And when you looked into them, you didn't see some Maharaja or somebody on an elephant, but you saw their mother in the kitchen. And it was so interesting to me, this marriage of West and East and historic and modern, that I wanted to follow them up. And so I'm here today with my wife and daughter, and we have been bowled over by the amount of work that has gone into this exhibition, which has moved on so far from the one of 1999. And the most attractive feature of this exhibition for me is the multiple backup material, which is displayed in a beautiful way, and so you can see where they manufactured their eventual pictures from. And again, I find the eventual presentation of the large portraits, which contain so much other stuff. I even saw reference to Vesalius, my hero of anatomical books, in one of them. So they crammed them with interesting historical detail.